Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to speak today on the Shariah analysis of cryptocurrency. But before I go further presenting my thought, I would like to make a disclaimer that this is still an ongoing research. Thus, the findings that I am going to present today is still prelim findings, which have not been finalized. And then also, I would like to disclaim that this is my personal opinion. It is not the stance of ISRA. So this is the outline of presentation today. First, we will look at an overview of cryptocurrency. I think this morning, Dr. Reza has already, elaborated with, in detail, what is cryptocurrency and then what is also Bitcoin. So I will not go in detail in terms of the technical aspects of Bitcoin or currency. And then also, I must confine my presentation today. I'm not looking at the cryptocurrency as a whole, but my focus would be on the Bitcoin alone. So if we look at the cryptocurrency market, just as an overview, this has been taken 1 month ago on 7 October. You can see what is the market capitalization of cryptocurrency. And then what was the value of Bitcoin a month ago. And then if you compare with today's figure, it progressive significantly, where today's Bitcoin price has gone up from 4,000 last month to 7,000 USD this month. As of today. So if you don't believe me, you go to coinmarketcap.com and then you can see the changes of the market, cryptocurrency market, which is very volatile and very progressive. You can see the progression day by day. So, in short, what Dr. Reza mentioned this morning, this is an illustration, a brief and simple illustration on how Bitcoin works. So it involves transactions and it involves mining process. I will not go through this as well, because you have already been taught and then been feeded on this this morning. But what I am interested in is in identifying what are the features of Bitcoin. First, it has no intrinsic value. Second, it has no physical form. It exists only in digital form. In other words, it is intangible. So we need to look at, from Shariah perspective, whether intangible asset qualify as property or not, which I think, based on the research that ISRA has already conducted, intangible asset is considered as a property or wealth from the Shariah perspective. Second, in terms of whether it is a supply which is not determined by the central bank. Hence, it is stateless. And then also, it is not issued or controlled by any government or even any single person. Hence, it has no central point of failure. Anything happen to Bitcoin, you don't have any specific person that you can refer to. Just a glance through about who has banned Bitcoin. I think a few countries have already issued, not in a form of legal ban, legal document, but more of announcement or precaution. So like Central Bank of Bangladesh, for example, Bitcoin is not a legal tender of any country. I quoted this from a website. So any transaction through Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency is a punishable offense. Another country like China, for example, Bitcoin is strictly banned on banks, as the Central Bank of China is owned 70% by the Chinese government. In China, for example, it is only banned for banks, but publicly it is not banned. In terms of Thailand, Bank of Thailand ruled that Bitcoin is illegal because of lack of existing laws. And then also Central Bank of Iceland, where issued a statement explaining legal status of Bitcoin, where purchasing them violate the Foreign Exchange Act. So these are among countries which has already banned the cryptocurrency or in specific Bitcoin. But there are most of the countries have not issued any regulation. And then, as Mr. Nizam mentioned, a very minority has already acknowledged Bitcoin and allowed Bitcoin. So who regards Bitcoin as what? So I just took an example of Germany, for example. Germany, in its Federal Financial Supervisory Authority, declares that it is legally binding financial instrument. Look at the word financial instrument. It is a financial instrument defined by the Germany authority. And in Japan, it is very interesting, where Japan, in its Payment Services Act, mentioned that it is a property value for payment. Again, it doesn't say that it is a currency with a legal tender, but it just says that property value for payment. And then in Canada, it is a virtual currency. It is treated as money service business. And then for Brazil, it is treated as financial asset, not cryptocurrency. So who accepts Bitcoin as a mode of payment? So these are among the top 10 merchants who have accepted Bitcoin as a mode of payment. So take, for example, if you check under Microsoft, they do accept, if you want to buy Windows 10, then the cost in Bitcoin is 0.0031. So this is the price of Windows Home in terms of Bitcoin. So now comes the question, what is Bitcoin from the Shariah viewpoint? First, we need to understand why do we need to ascertain the Sharia ruling on Bitcoin. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ya'ti 'ala an-nasi zamanun la yubali al-mar'u ma akhadha minhu amin al-halal am min al-haram." So it is important for us because Rasulullah has already warned us there will be a time which will come where people will not care how do they get their money or their property, how do they gain their wealth, whether it is from halal or haram. So looking at the trend of people being crazy in investing or in buying Bitcoin, so it is very important, very significant for us to understand what is the standpoint of Sharia with regards to Bitcoin. So when we look at the previous studies, previous discussions on the status of Bitcoin from Sharia perspective, there are a few angles which people have looked at. First, is it money or is it currency? Second, is it commodity? So these two are among the mostly quoted in literature, although it is very scarce now to find literature on Bitcoin from Sharia perspective. But when people talk about Bitcoin from Sharia perspective, these are the two elements that they look at. But based on Mr. Nizam's presentation this morning, I would like to draw another perspective on how Sharia scholars need to look at Bitcoin, which is as a financial asset or financial instrument. So first, we look at wealth in general, because these three things falls from Shariah perspective under wealth. So wealth is the big picture, and then underneath is commodity, and then money, and then also financial asset. And then you can see here, the commodity and money, there is some overlap over here, where based on the recognition by the society or uruf, a commodity can also be regarded as commodity money, which can be used as a mode of payment. So this is where the commodity can also act as money. And then when you look at the money itself, and then the financial assets, if you look at, we are going to go through later what is financial assets, then we can see that there's some overlapping between financial asset and money. Some of the financial asset can be in a form of money, but how to make that money to be a financial asset, we will see later on. Now, we first need to examine what are the criteria of wealth. So there are 4 main criteria of wealth. These 4 criteria should be applicable to all these 3 types of wealth that I've already categorized. First, it should be recognized by the Shariah as valuable and beneficial. Second, it is identifiable. You can identify that property or that money, and then it is transferable. You are able to transfer from one person to another person. In the case of exchange, for example, if you buy a handphone, you can transfer that handphone to your buyer, and then it can be owned. You have the ability to own it. So you cannot sell something which you cannot own. Then we look at Bitcoin as a commodity. So what is the specific criteria of commodity? One of the criteria that has been highlighted by our previous scholars is that it must have an intrinsic value. Intrinsic value in which it can benefit from. So if you look at the analogy of selling this microphone, for example, in exchange of money. So this microphone is considered as muthman, or subject matter. And then the money, the consideration that you are paying in exchange for the microphone is considered thaman, or price. So the requirement that has been set for anything to be muthman, or to be a subject matter of sale, is that it must have an intrinsic value that can be benefited from. If you look at what Ibn Qudamah said, it is an interesting statement by Ibn Qudamah from Hanbali school, where he said that urud is the plural of ard, and it refers to all the various forms of wealth, excluding media of exchange, or thaman. Which means, if one has already considered thaman, currency as thaman, it cannot be considered as muthman, or subject matter. That's why in the exchange of currency, in Bay'u Sarf, where you exchange currency with currency, there are further requirements that Shariah has laid down. If you want to transact currency with currency, then you must fulfill 2 main conditions. First, it must be spot transaction. If it is with same currency, for example, dollar with dollar, then it must be of equivalent value. So these are 2 further requirements if you want to transact currency with currency, which is thaman with thaman. Because in currency exchange, you cannot differentiate which one is thaman, which one is muthman. So that's why Shariah has laid down specific regulations in that sense. And then another interesting quote from Ibn Rushd, where he said that وبين العروض التي المقصود منها بالوضع الأول خلاف المقصود من التبر والفضة أعني الانتفاع بها للمعاملة. What does it mean? The primary purpose of the urud or goods or sil'ah or commodity is according to the original assignment, which is opposite to the intended purpose or intended use of gold or silver, which in other words, the intended meaning from the commodities or from the urud, from the sil'ah, is to benefit from the property itself, from the asset itself. So then we go to the analysis in terms of Bitcoin versus commodity, whether Bitcoin fulfill the requirement of commodity or not. We look at the first criteria, which is recognized by Shariah as valuable. This is quite interesting. It depends on the interpretation of the person, whether they regard it as valuable or not. But based on the previous presentation, looking at the price of what we call a price of Bitcoin, which increased from day one until now, then we can say that it is recognized as valuable from the Sharia point of view, because although it is being created or being minted using algorithm, using computer programs, but it doesn't have any prohibited element in it. Because when you look at from Sharia point of view, there are two things. When it comes to the Sharia compliant asset or Sharia non-compliant asset, you need to look at whether it is prohibited in itself. Like, for example, when you talk about khamr, when you talk about wine, it is prohibited in itself. Although some people, non-Muslim, regard it as something which is beneficial, but Sharia doesn't recognize it. So in terms of Bitcoin, there is no prohibitions. There is no clear prohibitions that it is not valuable from the Sharia point of view. And then second, it must have an intrinsic value that can be benefited from. I've already explained just now that any property to be considered as commodity, it must be something which can be used for itself. It cannot be, say for example, like this microphone. I'm using this microphone as an example because I don't have any other things on my hand to show as an example. So please pardon me with that one. So for example, this microphone, you have any other purposes for this? Specific purpose for this microphone for you to make sure that your voice is clearer. But in the case of Bitcoin, so far, based on the usage, it has no other purpose except for you making profit or accept a mode of payment. If you have Bitcoin, you cannot, of course you cannot eat it, but try to think of other purposes that Bitcoin can serve. I cannot find any other purposes that Bitcoin can serve except as a mode of payment and also as an investment instrument. So for that one, I put no for that feature. In terms of identifiable, I think it is easily identifiable. In terms of transferable, it is easily transferable, and also it can be owned. And then Dr. Riza has already mentioned that you can, it is the probability of Bitcoin being hacked is very improbable. If it is not impossible, it is very improbable. So then, I would cross Bitcoin as commodity. Now we go to, is Bitcoin money or currency? When we speak about money or currency has its own criteria or characteristics. These are the three criteria based on the conventional understanding of money. These three elements, unit of account, medium of exchange, and store of value, these are three main characteristics or features of money. So then we relate to Bitcoin. Whether Bitcoin satisfies these three conditions, is it a unit of account? So far, based on the understanding that Bitcoin represents 8 decimal point, so we can say that Bitcoin has a unit of account. And then if you look at just now, the example of the price of Microsoft Windows 10, it is equivalent to 0.0031. So then it has a unit of account in that sense. In terms of medium of exchange, as we know, and as I have already explained, that there are some people, when I'm talking about these three criteria of money with regard to Bitcoin, it's very much within the confined community who have already accepted Bitcoin as a money. So it has been used as a medium of exchange for those who have accepted it as a mode of payment. And then whether it stores value or not. So this relates to the medium of exchange, whether Bitcoin has been used as a medium of exchange or not. Then we can say that in that case, Bitcoin holds the value that would appreciate and depreciate. And then the reliability of Bitcoin as medium of exchange indicate the ability of Bitcoin to store value because it can be used to measure the value of goods and debt in relation to time. However, we need to be cautious before we decide whether it stores value or not. We need to look at the volatility that Bitcoin has. So, in other words, although it can be or possibly be having store of value, but currently with the volatility of Bitcoin prices, then it would have a limited ability. I'm not denying that it doesn't have any store of value, but it has a limited ability. So then, that was the conventional requirements for Bitcoin. We'll look at from what are the further requirements from the Shariah. So when we look at what Ibn Taymiyyah said about nuqud, about money, Ibn Taymiyyah said, أما الدرهم والدينار فما يعرف له حد طبيعي ولا شرعي بل مرجعه إلى العادة والاصطلاح. This is very important. Because the benchmark or the criteria for us to determine what to be considered as money or currency or not is the custom or the societal agreement on that particular currency. This is because the basic ruling is that they are not intended for themselves. As I mentioned, thaman is not intended for themselves, but the objective of their use is to measure the value for what is being transacted. Gold and silver coins, for example, is not intended for themselves. If you are looking at from the currency perspective, from money perspective, don't look at gold or silver from the perspective of it being jewelry. Don't please exclude that from our discussion. Confine it to the discussion on gold and silver as a money. So gold and silver coins are not intended for themselves. Rather, they are media of exchange. This is why they are the price as opposed to all other forms of wealth which are intended for the benefits that reside in them. So this is the definition, what Ibn Taymiyyah said about money. Then Imam Malik said, "Walau annan nasa ajazu bainahum al-juluda hatta takuna laha sikkah wa aynun lakarihtuha an tuba'a bil-dhahab wal-wariq nadhiratan." What does it mean? There is no good in the sale of fulus for gold or silver for a deferred payment. And if the public, so Imam Malik wants to emphasize that if the public were to accept leather, kulit kambing or whatever skin of animals as a medium of exchange and turn it into minted money, I would detest its sale for gold and silver for deferred payment. In other words, what Imam Malik says, if the society has approved as an object to be money, where I've already mentioned, if it is commodity money, if the society has already approved it, then it should take the ruling of currency of gold and silver, as I already discussed just now. It is not permissible, therefore, to exchange one metal-based coin for two metal-based coins. This discussion was in regard of fulus, one type of money that was used during his time. So it is not permissible to exchange metal-based coin fulus for gold or silver, or for gold and coin on a deferred basis. In other words, fulus also takes the ruling of money at that time. So another condition that we need to put with regard to money from the Shariah perspective is that it is widely and commonly accepted by the society. And then we look at what our current scholars said. Sheikh Taqi Uthmani and Prof. Munzir Kahaf added another condition, which is legal tender, whereby it has to be conferred by the government for you to consider any money as a currency. The objective is basically to regulate inflation and deflation risk that may harm the value of currency and the underlying purchasing power that it holds. So this requirement actually was derived from the conditions that has been set by Ibn Qayyim. Ibn Qayyim has already set this condition previously in his book, I'lamul Muwaqqi'in, where it says that وَالثَّمَنْ هُوَ الْمِعْيَارُ الَّذِي بِهِ يُعْرَفْ تَقْوِيمُ الْأَمْوَالِ فَيَجِبْ أَنْ يَكُونَ مَحْدُودًا مُنْضَبِطًا مَضْبُوطًا لَا يَرْتَفِعُ وَلَا يَنْخَفِض. What does it mean? The thaman is the standard by which the value of all other forms of wealth is known. It is obligatory that to be precisely defined and regulated so that it doesn't rise and fall. So this is why it should be regulated, and the legal status should be conferred by the government. Then we make an analysis between money and Bitcoin, whether Bitcoin meets the requirement of money or not. If we look at whether it is unit of account, as I mentioned just now, it can be to some extent within the community who accepted it. Medium of exchange also yes. Store of value also yes, provided that the price volatility can be handled. There shouldn't be too high volatility in there. And then widely or commonly accepted, I put yes there within the confine of the community who accept Bitcoin, not the whole society. But in terms of legal tender, as you see, even Japan, which recognizes it as a mode of payment, has yet to declare it as a legal currency. So based on my research, I have not found any, although it regards it as a payment, but still doesn't really confer the legal tender. So then we have already crossed Bitcoin is not a commodity. Now we are going to cross again. It is not a commodity. So what is it? Is it a financial asset? So this comes the next slide. Is Bitcoin a financial asset? Before that, we need to know what is financial assets. So financial assets are resources over which ownership rights are enforced and from which future economic benefits may flow to the owner. So take, for example, what are the types of financial assets? Money is also a financial asset. And then equity instruments, for example, is a financial asset. Sukuk or bonds, conventional bonds, these are financial assets. But definitely all these must fulfill Shariah criteria before it qualifies to be a financial asset for investment. From a layman perspective, when we say financial asset, it is an asset where you can invest and then take profit out of it. So in regards to cash being a financial asset, if we look at money at its present value, say for example, 100 billion ringgit. If you exchange with USD, it is not considered as a financial asset. It's pure money where you use for exchange currency. But the moment you invest it, then it will become, the future value of your 100 billion will become 120 billion, for example, after 120 days. So this example, but how do you make money? Because as I mentioned just now, when you want to exchange money with money, it has to fulfill two criteria. First, it must be of same value if it is within the same currency, and then it must be spot transaction. So then how do you make money grow? It is through investment. So what you need to do to make your money grow, invest in investment account. I think Maybank Islamic, Bank Islam has already offered investment account. So if you want to make money out of your deposit, then deposit into investment account. I'm not trying to sell product for Maybank Islamic or Bank Islam, but what I'm trying to say, this is one way of you how to invest your money and then get good returns from your money. This is just an example. And then an equity instrument. So it's like what Mr. Nizam discussed just now, like IPO, they offer shares, then it has to fulfill the Shariah compliant shares from the Shariah perspective. So if an investor buy Shariah compliant shares, then in return, the investor will receive the dividend. So from there, it becomes a financial instrument and also the contractual right, like sukuk, for example. So I won't touch much detail on that one. So these are the top 10 Bitcoin exchanges where you can invest in Bitcoin. So now comes the analysis, Bitcoin versus financial assets. Whether Bitcoin, the value is dependent on the time its price. So based on the analysis, as you see in the first slide, where it has, the price has gone up, So we can say that from one time to another, it is dependent on the time it is priced. And then whether it is recognized as Shariah as valuable, as I mentioned, for Shariah to recognize, there are requirements for equities, there are requirements for sukuk to be recognized as Shariah compliant assets. So if, let's say, in terms of Bitcoin, we have mentioned it is valuable from the Sharia point of view, in the perspective of it doesn't have anything that explicitly say that it is not Sharia compliant, and then it's transferable, can be owned, store of value to some extent, and then whether, the last point is whether it is backed by underlying assets or Sharia compliant investments or not. This one, I don't think so far it complies, because Bitcoin has not got anything backing it up yet. And then I think we have seen previously even that there's no underlying asset backing the Bitcoin issuance. So then, what are we going to do? Are we going to put a cross again? I believe, yes, we have to put a cross again. So then, what will be the conclusion? So what is Bitcoin? Again, we go back to square one. What is Bitcoin? So my analysis is, it is definitely not a commodity, because it cannot be used other than money, other than a mode of payment or as one of the financial instruments. For it to be a currency, I would say that currently it has not fulfilled a criteria of currency until it is legally accepted and then legally conferred the legal status. And then whether it is a financial asset. So I still put a question mark. I have no decision on that yet, because my conclusion is for you to bring back home and then to think again. Because I said this is still prelim findings of the research. So is it a financial asset? It can be a financial asset, provided that it is backed by Sharia compliant assets and backed by Sharia compliant activities. And in terms of currency, if it is acknowledged, and then if it is acknowledged by the government, then it can possibly be a type of currency, future type of currency. With that, I end my presentation and I open the floor for any question if you have any.